Hello, this is Larry Van Mersbergen, host of the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. We recently learned of the passing of William Russell at the age of 99, one of the first companions, the first companion to fight Daleks, the first to enter the TARDIS with Jacqueline Hill, Carol Ann Ford, and William Hartnell. Only Carol is remaining from the original cast. This episode is dedicated to a Guinness Book of World Records holder and a great actor. I never got the chance to meet him, but I do have one autograph photo. So rest in peace, Ian Chesterton, science teacher at Coal Hill School.
They all say, who is Doctor Who? Where is he from? What does he do? They wonder who is Doctor Who? So I ask you, who's Doctor Who?
Welcome back to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, the podcast that explores the laminate-bound world of Doctor Who collecting and all kinds of Doctor Who merchandise. Sometimes just plain Doctor Who. Brought to you in part by Forbidden Planet and Bags Unlimited Incorporated. I am Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I've been collecting Doctor Who now for 43 years. Welcome to our 77th episode, celebrating Doctor Who collecting and much, much more. If you're just catching up with us for the first time, I opened one of the first Doctor Who stores in Chicago that exclusively served the Doctor Who fans in 1984 called Bundles from Britain. And we are mentioned in a wonderful book called Red, White, and Who, the Story of Doctor Who in America. Bundles from Britain lives on page 384, and you can find a link to buy this book on the front page of our website at drwhocollectors.com. We don't make any money on that book. We just want everybody to have a copy. We are part of the Direction Point Doctor Who Podcast Network, and you can find some great podcasts at directionpoint.org. And if you happen to be a Doctor Who podcaster, we would love to welcome you to join our great network of podcasts, including Time Streams, Police Box in a Junkyard, the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, Traveling the Vortex, and many more. For more information on that, and plus all the shows, go to directionpoint.org. Speaking of links, of course, every episode I include 2 great resources for collectors. And these are free, by the way, so it's always nice to get a free resource. Timelash.com, and after you go there, navigate to the TARDIS library, create a free account to keep track of your books, your vinyl, your CDs, your Betamax tapes, and media for free. Thanks to Mr. Dan O'Malley for keeping that for free. So if you need to do some more in-depth research, or maybe something that the TARDIS library doesn't cover, then you need Howe's Transcendental Toy Box. And you can find that at doctorwhotoybox.co.uk. And of course, by Howe, we mean, of course, our good friend David J. Howe. Great resource for collecting. Now, if you're shopping for Doctor Who items at great prices, look no further than DoctorWhoStore.com. It's Alien Entertainment's web store, and they have everything you need and always running sales on various items. If you live in Chicago or the western suburbs, you can select free pickup from the store. And while you're there at the store, browse their incredible selection of Doctor Who and other media items. The Lombard location is open Wednesday through Saturday, and now also open in Logan Square. So you can visit alienentertainment.com for locations and store hours. You can also find some great items at Forbidden Planet, but you don't need to go there. You can just stay here at drwhocollectors.com, select merchandise links, and, of course, don't forget our own eBay store. We've got lots of stuff on there, including some rare hardcovers that just came to light in my collection that were duplicates. We have many Target books listed, some of the other goodies, of course, and all the benefits from that precede the podcast here. They help us out. Another great place to find Doctor Who items is Who North America, and that's Keith and Jenny, great people. They opened up in the 80s, of course. You can find them at whona.com, that's WHONA.com. And, of course, least of all, don't forget our friends in London at the Who Shop. So they are listeners of ours, so we reach out to you guys. Cheers to you guys. And you can find them at thewhoshop.com. That's altogether thewhoshop.com. On our website, in addition to all the podcasts that we have, and some providers only give you the last 10 episodes, but my website has all 77 or 78 episodes at this point for your reference or your download pleasure or whatever you want to do with that. Just ask if you use any clips on your show, please get permission first. Also there, we've got the complete guide to Doctor Who classic hardcover books. I've been pointing that out to people who've been posting incorrect publication dates or incorrect information about the books and trying to help people out. We list a lot of reprints that people didn't even know existed. So check us out. All right, here was what's going on. Of course, coming up this November, we've got Chicago TARDIS 2024, the 25th anniversary of Chicago TARDIS, set for Thanksgiving weekend, November 29th through December 1st. Join us for the celebration of Doctor Who. A lot of guests have been announced, so as of this recording, here's what we have. We have 3 doctors. We've got Paul McGann, Sylvester McCoy, and Joe Martin, the fugitive doctor, will be there. Also, to you Blake Seven fans out there, we've got 3 Blake Seven actors, including Jan Chappell, Brian Croucher, and Sally Knivet. And I apologize if I mispronounced that. Also coming to this show, our good friend, the CEO of Big Finish, Jason Haig-Ellery, and also our good friend Sadie Miller, and we had her on the program not long ago. She's the daughter of Elizabeth Sladen. Also there will be Sonny McGann, who is Paul's son and an actor on Big Finish. More coming soon as this anniversary convention is shaping up. And for the first time here, I'm proud to announce Doctoberfest Infiltrate is set for Saturday, October 19th, and so far tentatively at Who North America, their store. And if it does move to a hotel, we will update you. And so far as guests go, I am the first guest, so I will be there, of course, presenting my new panel for the year, which will be a living history of classic Doctor Who books from 64 to 96. So you can see some of these books up close that you've only seen photographs of. I have a lot of them. And you can experience this living history for yourself. Of course, if you can't make it to Doctoberfest, you will see it at Chicago TARDIS and EgoCon in Plover, Wisconsin, and Consinity 25 in the following April. And speaking of which, EgoCon is a new convention that was added to my schedule. It's on Saturday, August 17th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Century Curling Center in Plover, Wisconsin. I am a guest there along with a few other folks so far, the full-size Daleks, and auction minis, vendors, activities, and things like that. A lot of charity auctions and things. So you can certainly take a look at that. Now, more information to that will be on our website. More to come. As I mentioned before, on our website, we have that classic hardcover section. And of course, I always hear many rumors about second printing or third printing hardcovers that people have sworn they've seen over the years. But we're always on the lookout for concrete proof of those existence. If you have a book that we claim does not exist, please contact me and provide some detailed photos, and I'd love to credit you on our guide. We love talking with collectors. If you want to share your story here or just contact me for details at drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com, we'd love to have you on the show. On today's show, these are popular episodes when I bring these out, but today I continue my series on Doctor Who classic hardcovers with the year 1984. And of course, joining me is the host of the Doctor Who Target Book Club, Tony Whitt. I'd like to thank our patrons. If you would like to see exclusive video material, including special video content and a lot of requests for the interview with Peter Purvis, and that's available on Patreon. So at the $15 level or above, you can access all of that material. To find us, of course, there you can go to patreon.com/Doctor Who Collectors Podcast altogether. And you can also support us at Podbean. It's drwhocollectors.podbean.com, and select the patron button to support us at any dollar level you feel comfortable. And of course, all the money goes to pay our bills. Our theme song is Who's Doctor Who, and we didn't play it today in honor of the memory of William Russell, but it's composed by Barry Mason and Les Reed, always performed by Fraser Hines, who was a good friend of William Russell. You can hear this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and Podbean. You can also find this almost anywhere you get your podcasts, and we are a Direction Point Network podcast. Now it's time for my time. I wanted to spend my time today talking about the late, great William Russell. I never got to meet him. Sadly, it was always one of my bucket list things to do, but that never happened. And now, of course, will never happen. He lived to be just short of his 100th birthday and was, cast as Ian Chesterton in the first season of Doctor Who. He lasted from An Unearthly Child to the last episode of The Chase. I had heard from Peter Purvis, actually, who did work with William, on the last episode of The Chase, as well as the first episode of The Chase when he was doing his other bit. But he said he was a great man and had a lot of respect for him. Of course, he did do many conventions in the UK and the occasional galley one in Los Angeles. So it was really nice that people have paid a lot of tribute to him, and we're trying to do the same as best as possible. He was a good man, starred in many things, including getting the honor in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest gap between appearances using the same character when he appeared as Ian Chesterton on The Power of the Doctor, and even got some spoken words on that. So that was quite something. And it really made us all tear up a little bit to see that group, that support group on that episode. It was really quite something. So it was really great. Now, when I first saw An Unearthly Child, which was at a convention in 1984, they showed it on a big screen in a video room. We were, of course, glued to the screen because we had never seen any William Hartnell stories. And it was just quite, breathtaking to see early Doctor Who and really understand what it's about. And I think that's sometimes lost on today's fans when people come up, the later generation of Doctor Who fans look back at those black and whites, there's mixed feelings about it, as far as, and they kind of tie your current set of experiences and values to that episode instead of remembering that it was 1963. Things were a little different. And of course, when I first saw it, it was only 20 years after the fact, so it wasn't that long ago. And I still enjoy watching it. In fact, we're lucky we can still watch An Unearthly Child here in the United States on BritBox, and I believe Tubi TV still has it as well. So, and of course, I've got the DVD in case all else fails. But I may even have the VHS somewhere, so we'll see. Any which way. It's just a great way to, every show has its beginning. The first episode of Seinfeld isn't that memorable either. But I liked An Unearthly Child. I really did. I thought, wow, it's just getting things going. And of course, dealing with, two strangers on the TARDIS doing time travel. And of course, the next adventure puts them with the Daleks. So that William Russell was the first companion to tackle the Daleks. Last year at Chicago TARDIS, I got to interview Katie Manning, which, she's a dear friend. And she was the first companion to battle the Master, which turned into an iconic character. And that, it kind of involved quite a bit of applause from the audience on that. And she talked quite a bit about the late Roger Delgado. But I did get to meet Carol Ann Ford this past year as well. And I did have the unique opportunity to be in a big room with director Rachel Talalay watching The Star Beast with 800 people in the room at Chicago TARDIS. I sat directly behind Carol Ann Ford. My VIP membership comes in handy there. And afterwards, I asked her. I got to ask her, how did you feel about it? And she had some tears in her eyes and said she thought it was great. And I thought it was a good story. I really liked it. And how Doctor Who has changed in the last 61 years, for her. That was an acting role for her that she did for a while, but didn't want to get typecast. Now she's happy to go to conventions and be part of it. I asked the same question of Tosin Cole a couple of years ago when he came to Chicago TARDIS, and I said, so how does it feel now? And he goes, well, now I'm recognized. I used to come from the theater and go get a cup of coffee and no one would pay any attention, and now everybody's like, wait, you're with the Doctor now. So it's a whole different ball game. Doctor Who is a huge thing for actors. The more actors I talk to about it, the more I understand, that they feel part of a very small club of people that got to do this, and including people who had one-off appearances on Doctor Who. They were really happy to do it. If you remember, the great late-night host James Corden had 2 appearances on Doctor Who. So, I mean, there's quite a big thing around being a part of that. And, of course, being a companion puts you in a very small group of people. Not as small as the Doctors. That club is very small. With the oldest member of that group in his 90s, the great Tom Baker, of course. And I did get to shake his hand back in 1984, so I'm very pleased with that. I've met most of the Doctors from 2 to 8. I have not met any of the newer Doctors because they're usually at conventions I can't attend, but that's, Monday. Maybe we'll get them in Chicago here. It's just a really important thing. William Russell is part of a group of men in the TARDIS, and I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. You had William Russell, you had Peter Purvis, and then you had Michael Craze, and then, of course, Fraser Hines there for quite some time, and then there's a long gap to Ian Marter for a very short period of time, and then again to Matthew Waterhouse, Mark Strickson, and let's see, going into, that's about it until you get to Mickey. So Mickey and Captain Jack and Rory, of course, and, Bradley Walsh's character, Bradley Walsh, Tosin Cole, all those wonderful people. If I left anybody out, of course, I'll hear about it, but I'm just doing this off the top of my head. But that's kind of where I'm at with this. I'm sad that another great Doctor Who actor has gone. And of course, I worry as some of my older Doctor Who friends are getting older in life, and we don't have a lot of time left with them. And the time we have left with them, let's have a great time. Because anytime you're at a convention with Fraser Hines, it's a party. And he will keep doing it as long as he can. So there you go. That's my time. Thank you for listening. After the break, of course, we will have our coverage of the 1984 classic hardcovers with Tony Whitt and the most outrageous offer. Until then, stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Juliet.
And I'm Nathan.
Experience Doctor Who from the very beginning through a classic fan's eyes.
And through the eyes of a new Who fan.
Reminisce and relive those classic moments with Nathan as he offers fun insight.
Or experience them for the first time with Juliet as she dwells on social issues, history, fashion, and the size of a flashlight.
We're the Time Streams podcast.
Find us on Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Keep collecting.
You are invited on an adventure across all of time and space. In a completely random order. It's the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. Jump in the TARDIS with your hosts,
Eric Gulbranson,
Asad Kheshki,
and
Matthew Kressel.
Explore Doctor Who TV stories, audio adventures, and books, both novels and non-fiction. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. It's the entire Whoniverse. On shuffle. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a member of the Direction Point Network and is available about once a month wherever you find your podcasts. You are listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Keep collecting.
Traveling the Vortex. Are you ready to embark on an epic journey through time and space? Join the thousands of Whovians around the world who've discovered Traveling the Vortex, the ultimate Doctor Who podcast for die-hard fans and curious newcomers alike.
Every week, we dive deep into the Whoniverse, discussing the episodes, theories, and hidden gems. We dissect the Doctor's adventures, share behind-the-scenes stories, and explore the legacy of this iconic show.
Traveling the Vortex brings fans together, fostering a global community of Whovians. Whether you're a fan of classic or new Who, there's something for everyone.
Join us on this incredible journey as we unravel the mysteries of time and space.
Don't miss out. Subscribe to Traveling the Vortex today on your favorite podcast platform.
Traveling the Vortex. Your ticket to adventure awaits.
Traveling the Vortex is a proud member of the Direction Point Podcast Network. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Keep collecting.
The vervoids are probably the best dirty joke in Doctor Who.
They're hermaphroditic plants.
A lot of plants are.
So there you go. It's based on science.
No, they'll ship anything.
There are probably 11 and handle shippers out there. You just have to drill a hole where his mouth is, and you're all set.
You know he needs the room. I've seen it in pictures.
I'm not saying you're not a fan. I'm saying you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Doctor Who gives a drunken Doctor Who podcast for the end times.
Up there is the scanner, those are the doors, that is the chair with the panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy.
And now it's time for the main story on the Doctor Who Collectors podcast. This is a continuation of our coverage of the classic Doctor Who hardcovers that we have done over several episodes, in fact over several years. We've covered 1974 through 1984, so a whole decade with the imprints of Universal Tandem, which were Alan Wingate, Longbow, and W.H. Allen, all of which no longer exist. We start now in 1984, where W.H. Allen is the only imprint used for the Doctor Who line, and not a robust year with 11 books being published, which was the same as the previous year. Also in this batch is one mysterious American hardcover that managed to slip by all of the merchants back in the day. So this is compared only to 10 Target paperbacks with new stories with no reprints this year. So again, if you're catching this podcast at the beginning, a brief history here. In 1975, Universal Tandem was sold by UPD to the British conglomerate Howard and Wyndham. And the company was renamed Tandem Publishing Limited before being merged with the paperback imprints of Howard and Wyndham's general publishing house, W.H. Allen, to become Wyndham Publications in 1976. I hope you're all taking notes out there. During 1977 to 78, the Wyndham identity was completely phased out, and the Tandem imprint was phased out in 1980. All surviving titles from the backlist were published under the principal paperback imprint Star Books. The Target imprint survives until 1993, though its latter years were used exclusively for Doctor Who novelizations. The Alan Wingate imprint was forever retired at the end of 77. The W.H. Allen imprint will be used until the run ends in June of 1988. Of course, anytime we talk about Doctor Who novels on this program, we are required by the Amalgamated Union of Tractators to include our resident Doctor Who specialist of novels and so forth, the producer and host of the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, a Direction Point Network podcast, the incomparable Professor Tony Whitt. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for having me back.
You're welcome. It's always nice to have you back here. And of course, hopefully the Tractators didn't get to you.
Well, this would have been the first year that they did. I actually have a story about 1984.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the first time we are covering a run of books that I received from my subscription from John Fitton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I keep talking about that on my podcast, and I look at the run of books that we're going to be looking at, and I notice that Dominators, Warriors of the Deep, Aztecs, Inferno, Highlanders, and Frontios. Those are the 6 books that I got during that subscription.
Wow, and all
I can confirm this now.
All books from that same year, too, so that's really cool. Of course, the publication of 11 Doctor Who books is not exactly robust, of course. They did that the previous year. There were no hardcover reprints this year, but one book was published by the elusive company Amereon, and we'll talk about that in due course. These hardcovers, of course, are extremely sought after today, and to afford them, you might have to try to sell your Nick Spender artwork to afford them, though that might not work out, and you will find out why very shortly. Books can be found in a couple different ways. First of all, ex-library edition, which is more popular out there. Those are books that are pulled or stolen from a library. Non-library copies are even more sought after, which will include retail store versions or publisher review copies or copies that never saw the shelf of a library. All of these titles that we're going to talk about today were the first books to be distributed in the United States, but not until 1985. So, as we talk about 1984, Tony, anything pop out in your memories of that year?
Just the fact that that would have been the first year that I saw Pertwee.
Oh, yes.
Because that's the year that my local PBS station finally got the new syndication package as opposed to the old one that we got in the States, I guess, back in the early 70s, mid 70s here in Chicago.
Yes, yes.
But I wasn't living in Chicago. I was living in Virginia. And that was the year that they went back and they picked up the Pertwee stories. And at that point, they were only doing the color stories, and they were only doing Inferno. And quick story about this,
Sure.
and I think I told it on my podcast
Yes.
when we did Inferno, but I got the book from John Fitton Books about 3 weeks before it was supposed to actually air on my PBS station. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to read this until I'm able to see it. And damned if I didn't have a choir trip that weekend.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't have a VHS at that point.
Right, right.
So I was hoping, praying we would get back from this trip in enough time for me to see at least part of it. And sure enough, I only got home in enough time to see the last 15 minutes. So I ended up having to read the book to find out what I had missed. And it was only years later that became such an important and favorite story for me. So, it certainly wasn't because of the book.
No. No, Inferno is one of my favorite stories. It's still, I recalled it as a child in the 70s, and again when they brought it back in the 80s. And for our listeners here, here's just a breakdown of what happened in Doctor Who history in 1984. So in January, Time magazine carries the first feature on Doctor Who, Who's Who in Outer Space. The article declares that the series is seen by 9.5 million viewers in 112 markets across the United States. In February, early 1984, Colin Baker makes his first U.S. convention debut in Miami, Florida, and coverage of that event appears in Fantasy Empire issue 12. Sadly, a thorough search of the vast collection here proves I don't have that copy of Fantasy Empire. So I was shocked because I thought I had them all, but apparently there was a numbering issue with that magazine. I have 3 number 6s that are all different. So I'm trying to figure that out, and that might be another conversation with Mr. John Peel, since he was the editor at the time. But I'm still looking for that copy because I'd love to find out more. Later in February, the February 18 issue of TV Guide has another article, Who Has 2 Hearts, 13 Lives, and 6 Faces. This states that Doctor Who is seen in 112 markets, as was cited earlier by Time. With all of the John Pertwee stories now fully cleared for U.S. syndication later in the year, as Tony just told that story, the BBC begins the process of clearing the existing 15 Hartnell and 5 Troughton stories. 5 Troughton stories still makes me depressed hearing that back then.
Yes.
With so few black and white serials complete, the BBC begins to actively contact overseas TV stations in the hope of finding some of the missing episodes with which to increase the available packages. By the end of the year, they do get some success. In April of '84, plans to film part of season 22 in New Orleans completely falls through, so instead they'll be moving the 2 Doctors to Spain. And I have a quick story about that, because I remember in early 1985, a close friend of mine in high school came to me and said, "Larry, I got to talk to you. When do you have lunch?" And so he sat down with me. He says, "You're not going to believe this. My family and I went to Spain for our vacation. And we decided to go to Madrid, and we were staying in this small hotel. And so as we were coming in, we saw these guys with cameras and with things like that. And so we were in an elevator, and I asked, are you guys filming? Are you guys from Hollywood?" And someone said, "No, we're better. We're British." And based on his description, he was speaking with Fraser Hines.
Of course he was.
So I said, "Oh my gosh." So he shared with me the couple of photos he took of the set, because it was near this church that they were filming. And I thought, wow, that's great. Of course, it would be a while before I'd see the 2 Doctors. But that was quite a story about that. Going on to June of '84, another issue of TV Guide has a review by Robert Mackenzie, which basically declares the series to be cheap and tacky, but easy to get hooked on. So he starts off bad, but comes out okay there. In October of 1984, Marvel US commences reprints of Doctor Who magazine comic strips, picking up from where the 4-issue canceled Marvel Premiere series left off in '81. The comic runs for 23 issues between October 84 and August of 86, and that would be this one. Of course, this is the Star Beast, which we know gets made later on. So they ran 23 of those issues from Marvel in the United States. For Resurrection of the Daleks, Lionheart was sent different versions of the episode, including undubbed first edits, including 25-minute cuts of parts 1 and 2, with the latter missing music and sound effects, and several other extra and extended scenes, plus 2 45-minute edits, with which the second was missing music and sound effects. So Lionheart created its omnibus movie versions by combining the 2 edits, and a few years later, corrected versions with the missing audio were supplied. So a fully dubbed new 4-part edit was known to be shown by a Canadian TV station in December of 86. In 1984, Doctor Who merchandise becomes more available through specialist mail-order companies in the United States, including Starlog Press and Geppies, as well as fan clubs, and more on that in just a bit. By December of 84, as had been announced at Longleat, a full package of John Pertwee stories released for syndication, although the package was made available from the start of 85. The first serial went to air as early as December 84. This is the same Third Doctor package that was already sold to New Zealand and Australia. The Pertwee package also includes 4 stories that had not been sold to the States before. Since episode 3 of Planet of the Daleks was in black and white, the BBC provided an edited version of recut episodes 2 and 4, making the story into a 5-part serial, which I remember back then watching that going, how did they get out of the cell?
Right.
Because I was like, wait, they were in it. Wait, hold on. Yeah, of course, we didn't know, just the limited knowledge we had back then. I was like, wow. Invasion of the Dinosaurs was also re-edited because episode 1 was in black and white. So the titles were recaptioned part 2 and renumbered and all that. What a pain that must have been. So the story was issued as a 5-parter. Speaking of which, as a Doctor Who fan, I don't think we would have cared if the episode faded into black and white and then back to color again. Because that just didn't seem to be a problem. In December of 84, K9 and Company was aired at Christmas, although not widely sold. It was offered by Lionheart to the United States as a 2-parter, but nobody took them up on it, as it was never aired in the United States. So there you go. Doctor Who conventions in the U.S. picked up with stops in Fort Lauderdale, Philadelphia, St. Louis, San Francisco, Rochester, Columbus, Ohio, Arlington, Virginia, Boston, Detroit, Mobile, Alabama, Denver, Chicago in July, Tampa, San Jose, Buffalo, Manhattan, New Orleans, and culminating with the largest convention ever on November 23rd, 1984, Spirit of Light, TARDIS 21, featuring Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Anthony Ainley, Nicholas Courtney, Nicola Bryant, Janet Fielding, Elizabeth Sladen, Lalla Ward, Mark Strickson, Fraser Hines, John Nathan Turner, Terrence Dix, Ian Martyr, John Levine, and Richard Franklin. The meaning is the reunion of Doctors in season 21. This was the famous convention in which the water pistol fight broke out between Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee, for which I had a front row seat for, because I was at that show. And a quick story about that, too. Our fan club went to that as spectators, and it was a lot of fun. I actually met Mark Strickson at that convention, and last year at Chicago TARDIS, he came to me and said, did we meet before? And I said, yeah, back in 84. I said, I remember you. I was like, really? And he came up with part of the conversation we had. I said, wow, that's a good memory. Because this is the second time I've seen you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was wild. I did remember when I spoke with Elizabeth Sladen, I noticed she was visibly pregnant at the time. So when I interviewed Sadie Miller on the podcast, I said, well, actually, we have met before, but you weren't aware. I met your mom while she was pregnant with you. And so she was like, yeah, that's right. She traveled with that. I said, yep, she sure did. And of course, some of the actors here are no longer with us, and this is it's where I shook hands with Patrick Troughton, and when you saw Pertwee in 84, I literally saw Pertwee in 84. That was such a cool show. And of course, a few memories for myself. 1984 was a very pitiful Not a pitiful year, although it was the year of Big Brother, I remember. That was the... It was a very pivotal year. This is how we bounce back from those mistakes, folks, in the podcast world. In 1984, I had accumulated so much Doctor Who merchandise as a collector. For the last 3 years, I've been doing it. I had contacted people in the UK via pen pals. Nobody knows what that is anymore, but that's when you write letters to folks and they write back. And it was really kind of cool that they were able to go to the used bookstore, buy a bunch of stuff, send it to me, and I would reimburse them for basically their cost plus the postage. And so I had so much that I could open a small store. So I formed a company called Bundles from Britain. In early 1984. I was 15 years old at the time. And I thought the idea was I was going to take the items from fan club to fan club. So I got out my list of fan clubs and I called a bunch of places and got tables set up at different places all throughout the suburbs. Of course, it was my stop at the many companions of Doctor Who that kind of changed history here. And I became a member of that fan club. That was a very, very robust club in the 70s. But my second customer, who bought about $100 worth of Target books from me, pulled me aside later and said, "Hey, you've got something here." And that person was Gene Smith. So the rest, as you say, is history. So that was what happened there. And you can find out a little bit more about it in Red, White, and Who, the story of Doctor Who in America. In fact, the teaser here is my next episode of this podcast. I'll have Stephen Warren Hill on the program to talk more about that book. So going on to the books now. In 1984, of course, all Doctor Who hardcovers will be W.H. Allen hardcovers, printed with laminated covers, all using the Sutton logo, or neon logo as we call it, in various colors. All of these books were distributed and sold in the USA, I think with the exception of one, through my shop, Bundles from Britain, as we bought out the entire stock from Lyle Stewart. Lyle Stewart citing poor sales. And so we start in January 1984 with Doctor Who's Snake Dance by Terrance Dicks. The cover is by Andrew Skilleter, 3,000 copies printed. The book had a price of £5.95, which in today's dollars would be $23.43. In the US, the price was $14. For the first time, the paperback would not be released until 3 months after the hardcover. The original audiobook was set to be narrated by Matthew Waterhouse, but the company Audio Go went out of business in 2013. The 2021 audiobook is read by Peter Davison. This and the next book incorporate Peter Davison in the logo. This was to keep focus on the current Doctor, but however, the excessive cost of doing that made the cost of the book higher than the actual retail price of the book. So they stopped doing it pretty quickly. Book's not too hard to find, but you could pay about $100 or slightly more for a copy in non-library edition. This book, of course, was part of that U.S. distribution. My copy happens to be the copy from 1985, and the binding is still pretty tight on this. So this is not too long ago for you guys, Tony. So what did the club think of Snake Dance?
That was episode 137. And Dalton gave it a 3. Allison gave it a 2, which was actually kind of high for her.
Yeah.
And I gave it a 3. We all thought it was very straightforward, not a great book, but I think it was that unfair comparison to Kinda.
Yeah.
Because even though Terrance Dicks obviously had no idea what he was doing with the script there, they could see that there was something really special about the story that was shining through in the prose, whereas Snake Dance, not so much.
No, unfortunately, but I did enjoy watching the show. I mean, it was, I believe, one of the early appearances of Martin Clunes.
Yes.
So playing a role in Doctor Who, but yeah, and it's one of the first hardcovers I ever got because we got these in bulk. I mean, I couldn't imagine until years later, knowing the sales were so poor that they dumped them all in the United States and nobody wanted them. Now everybody wants them.
Right.
So next book here, we move on to February 16, 1984. And you'll notice, folks, I'm getting more specific with the dates because as we get further along, we now have better information on when these books actually got published. So the next book we have is Enlightenment by Barbara Clegg. The cover is by Andrew Skilleter, and 3,000 copies were printed. This book was included in the U.S. distribution. The logo, of course, incorporates Peter Davison once again, as mentioned before, but this will be the last book that incorporates Peter Davison's logo as the cost exceeded the price of the book. Prints of Andrew Skilleter's cover are still available from his website at andrewskilleter.com. This also appears in the 1987 Who Dares calendar that Andrew did. The audiobook was released in 2020 with Stephen Pacey doing the reading. And if you don't remember who Stephen Pacey was, he played Del Tarrant on Blake 7. So there's not much more about it. This book is not terribly rare and can be found for about $50 to $60 in mint condition. And since this is really close back to the other one, what did the club think of Enlightenment?
That would have been episode 140, and all three of us gave it a 3, mainly because we all kind of liked it, but Allison liked the entire trilogy.
Okay.
Dalton, by that point, had become tired of the Black Guardian, because why wouldn't you? And I was expecting more from Barbara Clegg. I was really expecting that one, especially since it was the first book in story order novelized. Well, no, that's not true. I was about to say it's the first book in story order novelized by a woman, but I think it's actually the other way around. I think it's the first one done by a woman in publication order, because we'd already had Celestial Toymaker.
Right, right.
So, yeah, it was 3s across the board. Nothing to write home about, but nothing horrible either.
That's good. I wanted to point out, too, this is the book that caught my attention back in the day because as we were preparing orders for the 1985 convention, on the back they listed titles that were also available, and I noticed Doctor Who Dalek Omnibus. Now, we've talked about the Dalek Omnibus on previous episodes, but I was like, wait a minute, we didn't get any of those, did we? And so we contacted Lyle Stewart, and they told us that, oh, we're so sorry, that book not available to you in the United States. Even though they published roughly 30,000 of those Dalek omnibuses, because you can still get those for roughly $20 new. About around, and people have been talking about paying £1 for them in bookstores. So I'm like, yeah, that's because they printed so many, but they didn't dump any of them on the United States, but they also didn't sell as well. So we're not sure why, but they would not sell that to us. But that was listed on the back of Enlightenment. So on April 19, 1984, we get The Dominators by Ian Marter, the cover by Andrew Skilleter. 3,000 copies were printed, and this book was also part of the 85 U.S. distribution. This was the very first Second Doctor's book in 3 years, with the last one being The Cybermen. The likeness of Ronald Allen as Rago on the cover was actually considered the best by the actor himself. Prints of this cover are available from Andrew Skilleter's website. The paperback was delayed until July, which was unusual, and there was no explanation why there was a delay. This book, definitely not very hard to find. I've seen it for under $50 in new condition. And so this goes a little bit further back for you guys, Tony, but what did you guys think of Ian Marter's Dominators?
That would have been episode 43. And let's see, Allison gave it a 0.5 because she was very rough on books early on,
yes,
and still is. Dalton gave it a 2, and I gave it a 2. And mainly that's because we had already read some Ian Marter by that point, and we all agreed it was not great Ian Marter, though we also agreed that given the source material, there's not much you can do with it. It's not a great story by any means necessary. So we figured, yeah, that's actually being kind by our standards.
Okay, and I also wanted to point out again, like I mentioned in an Enlightenment, we had that list of books on the back that included the Dalek Omnibus. This was the very next book, and the Dalek Omnibus was no longer listed on the back. So all the other books are listed. So I was a little bit, that always raises an eyebrow when they're trying to market other things and the book that they printed so many of and didn't sell isn't there anymore. But moving forward, May 24th, 1984, we get Warriors of the Deep, by Terrence Dix with a cover by Andrew Skilleter. 3,000 copies printed. This book was sold in the United States in 1985 for $12. Peters Davison's image, of course, was not included in the logo. As I mentioned earlier, the cost of paying for that likeness made the book lose money, so they decided to start making money. But as a little spoiler alert for you guys, the hardcover run only lasts 4 more years, and they cut it off mid-year. So the sales are not terribly good. Prints of this cover are available on Andrew Skilleter's website. This book is not hard to find. I've seen it for less than $50 in mint condition. So what did Ellison and the crew here think of Warriors of the Deep?
Well, we were joined on that particular episode, 146, by Jim Sangster.
Oh, yes, Jim.
And that's a favorite story of Jim's, and he gave it a 3. Allison gave it a 2. Dalton gave it a 3, and I surprised everybody by giving it a 3.5. Because even though Allison didn't think the story would stick to her ribs, to use her phrase, Dalton and Jim rather liked it. And I appreciated just how much Terrence Dix added to it. But also, having talked about that subscription, I believe Warriors of the Deep, because of the delay on Dominators, may have been the first one I got in that subscription. And so it was one of that pack of novelizations that I read for probably the first time before seeing the TV story, and I was blown away by it. The TV version, not so much.
No.
Never been a favorite.
No, not one of my favorites either. I did also want to point out just a quick thing here about this book is that this particular copy I have here, while it's in mint condition, is actually covered by a special dust jacket that was created by Andrew Skilleter. He did a set of 4 of these, and he signed each one of them. It doesn't change anything about the cover, but he wanted to put out these limited edition dust jackets. He did 4 of them, including one for the Twin Dilemma, which we'll cover in the next episode of 85, where he did the original cover featuring Colin Baker. These unfortunately are out of print as of this recording. Possibly in June of 84 or possibly in 83, we're not exactly sure, this very mysterious company called Amereon published a Doctor Who and the Android Invasion in the United States. It looks like a Pinnacle logo on the cover. As we actually found out, Pinnacle actually licensed the logo from these guys. So that would explain a lot there. The price is completely unknown, but according to the book, it says 80 copies were printed, and there is absolutely zero evidence to support that. These are extremely hard to find, and you could pay up to $100 or more for these in sealed condition. This book is still sealed in the shrink wrap and still has the barcode on the back. But there's no need to catch a review on this. We've reviewed the Android Invasion, so if you want to catch that review, that would be Target Book Club episode 86, which features Danny Horn. So I did my homework on that one.
I'm so glad you looked that up for me, because I would have forgotten that.
Yeah, I thought, I don't need to do the review twice, but still, it's one of those books that I thought, when I finally got a full set of these Ameronian, Aeonian books, I was like, people still, especially when I have pictures of my shelf online, are like, wait a minute, what is that book? I've never seen that book before, especially outside the United States. And as a dealer from 84, we didn't know about these. And, of course, no internet back then, no way to search it or anything like that, but these were just not made available to anybody. And if they appeared in bookstores, we don't know. It's really quite, just a head-scratcher. Moving on to June 21, 1984, we get Doctor Who and the Aztecs. Actually, not the and, it's just Doctor Who, the Aztecs, by John Lucarati. The cover is by Nick Spender. 3,000 copies were printed. This book was included in the 1985 USA distribution, and this was the first historical story since 1973. And just a quick little note about this: in 1964, we had The Crusaders published by Frederick Mueller and Company. In 1974, we had The Crusaders published by White Lion. And in 1984, W.H. Allen prints out The Crusaders. So every 10 years, you got a Crusader. So there you go. A collector sold Nick Spender's original painting in December 2016 and got £175 for it. The asking price was £300.
Oh, my.
So zero demand for his artwork. The audiobook was actually read by William Russell in 2012. This book is not very hard to find, as opposed to the previous two versions of The Crusaders, which are very difficult to find. So you can pay a little less than $50 for this in mint condition. So this goes way back for you, Tony. So what did you guys think of The Crusaders?
Episode 6.
6? Wow.
Yeah. Sheena Annapera was still with us then. This is back when we were doing weird integers for our ratings.
Okay.
She gave it a 3.65. Dalton gave it a 4, and I gave it a 3.8. We liked it, and it's actually quite odd for me to give Lucarati a high score, as we're going to find out later on. But yeah, this is one of the Lucarati books that I actually do enjoy, and it was one of the few novelizations that the TV story actually lived up to. So they really do complement each other quite well.
That's wonderful. I've actually read The Crusaders because it's one of the first books done by Target back in the day, and I did enjoy it. I did want to point out, though, that like I mentioned in the previous WHLN books, they listed a list of upcoming titles. This book does not list any, so they stopped doing that. Not sure why, but that was something that I noticed in the publishing aspect of this book. Of course, all my books are from that time period. They're all in mint condition from 1985. I've had them for many, many years. So the next one, we go to July 19th, 1984. We get Inferno by Terrence Dix. Cover by Nick Spender, and 3,000 copies were printed. Also part of the USA distribution. 2 different sketches were done for the cover, but they couldn't get permission from actor Ian Fairbairn, who played Bromley. He's one of the green guys. And so they made the choice clear and did the other green guy. So in 2011, the audiobook was read by Carolyn John. Not a very hard book to find, and no information about the cover art on this one, whether it was sold or not. But you can find this one for a little bit more money for some reason. It's been ranging from $75 to $100 in mint condition. So again, this one of your favorites, Tony. So how did the club like this one?
Well, that was episode 53, and it's very meh. The book is very meh. That Allison gave it a 2, Dalton gave it a 3, I gave it a 2.5. And our joke about it was that it's not bad dicks, not great dicks, just meh dicks. And we noted in that episode that if he had written this in 1975, which was the same year that he was doing novelizations like Spearhead from Space.
Right.
It would have been a stronger book. It would have been a much stronger book. Instead, 1984. So, not quite sure why that happened. But it does not live up to the visual story, because even though I kind of liked the book when I read it back in 1984, when I saw the story, I was blown away, and still am. I have a very personal connection to that story, so to be disappointed by the book of it is kind of a letdown.
Oh yeah, that is disappointing. Inferno is one of my favorite TV stories. I saw it in 1975 when they aired it in Chicago, and I saw it again when they brought it back in the mid '80s. The story is it's just a really good story, and that whole first season of John Pertwee, where he's trapped on Earth and has to deal with things that come to the planet or about the planet, were just so well written. And the story about the early books from 1973, just to remind our listeners about that, there were a lot of titles that were put forward. But if you remember, in 73, they only did 2 books. They did Auton Invasion and Cave Monsters. And in 74, they did 3 Doctors and Planet of the Spiders. They had plans to do Day of the Daleks and the Doomsday Weapon with the original Achilles artwork, and they decided, nah, we're not going to do that. So that's why those books got delayed until the writer's strike in 1981, and they were able to put out old books without having to worry about the writers. So just disappointing that it didn't get written sooner. August 16, 1984, we get The Highlanders by Jerry Davis. Another cover by the great Nick Spender. 3,000 copies were printed, and this book was included in the 1985 distribution. It was very unusual, but Nick was permitted to use the likeness of Fraser Hines and William Dysart on the cover. Those are the two people pictured. It is not known if they were paid for it, because when I asked Fraser about it, he couldn't remember. Nick's original painting, again, went for much less than the asking price. The original price was £300, got whittled down to £120. In 2012, the audiobook was read by Annika Wills. Now, there's a big story behind that. Fraser opened up to me and said he was very disappointed as he lobbied very hard to do the audiobook for this. For instance, he could do all the Scottish and do Patrick Troughton's voice very well. And he was very disappointed when they never got back to him. And they just gave it to Annika Wills. He has no ill will to Annika, of course. They still remain good friends, but he was just very disappointed about that. It's one of the most popular Target books, since none of the episodes exist. My copy is signed both by the author, Jerry Davis, and Fraser Hines. And you can find this book in mint condition for a little under $50. And if you do get a copy, you might want to take it to your convention and get it signed by Fraser. Unfortunately, Jerry Davis has passed on, but that's the signature of Jerry Davis in the back. All right. So, Tony, what did you think of the Highlanders?
Well, that was episode 30, and we had both Jenny Ingersoll and J.G. McCrory on that one. J.G. gave it a 3.5. In fact, I think that's the first episode he did with us. Jenny gave it a 3, and I gave it a 3. We all agreed that it was not bad. Jenny didn't love it or hate it, and I personally wanted more. I'm not a very big fan of historicals, but that is one that I definitely wanted to have more substance to, and unfortunately, for some reason or other, it just didn't have it.
Oh. Yeah, it's unfortunate because it's one of the books I read since I was never going to see it, and the possibility of Highlanders getting a animation is getting slimmer and slimmer as those ideas are no longer being fronted, and Disney hasn't chimed in on that yet. But it's and when I did present this book to Fraser for signing, he also shared stories about filming that, because when he first signed on, he had no idea he was going to be a companion. That was added later on, and of course he goes on to be the longest running companion in the history of the series. So something he still lords over other companions. So
of course.
And you'll probably, I can't say for sure, but you'll probably see him at Chicago TARDIS this year because he really felt bad about missing last year. So next we get Tractators. September 20th, 1984, we get Frontios, or by Christopher H. Bidmead, with a cover by Andrew Skilleter, 3,000 copies printed, and this book was, of course, included in the 1985 USA distribution. Prints of the cover are available from Andrew's website at andrewskilleter.com. The audiobook was released in 2015, read by Christopher H. Bidmead. Not much more to say to that except Tractators. So the book is not hard to find. So you can get all the Tractators you want for about $35 and mint condition. So I know I actually listened. I remember listening to your podcast on this and how much your group really loved the Tractators.
Yes.
So
well, it's more accurate to say we love Christopher H. Bidmead.
Right.
The Tractators can go suck wherever they wanted to.
Which they do.
Which they do. But Dalton gave it a 4. J.G. McCrory was back with us again. He gave it a 4.5. Allison gave it a 3.25, which is a significantly high rating for her. And I gave it a 4.5. I honestly think it is one of the best Target novelizations ever. And it is so good that I cannot watch the TV version and enjoy it.
Yeah, makes
because
sense.
it does not measure up to this book. Allison also had a funny joke there.
Okay.
She said that she thinks Google Translate is probably a human head and an arm attached to a pendulum. And I think she's probably right about that.
Probably right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And of course, if you love Tractators, I know Big Finish did a story where the Tractators return. So I can't think of it off the top of my head, but Colin Baker is the doctor for that one. I heard it not long ago, but I remember him getting all agitated about the Tractators. So Frontios, the best Target book ever, according to Tony Whitt. I love it. Next, in October 18, 1984, we get Planet of Fire by Peter Grimwade. The cover is by Andrew Skilleter, 3,000 copies printed. Book was part of the USA distribution. And of course, interesting enough, in 1985, the book came out before the episode aired in Chicago. Prints of the cover are available from Andrew's website. The 2018 audio book was read by Peter Davison. This book is definitely not hard to find, and this is actually the second copy I've received. So it can go for anywhere from 50 and under. So I know this was pretty recent for you, Tony. So what did you guys think of Planet of Fire?
That was episode 151, and Dalton said it was a 3. Allison gave it a 3.5. After which she said, "Who am I even?" Because it's significantly high for her. I also gave it a 3.5, and Dalton basically said it was an inoffensive book, but he does have questions about it, whereas both Allison and I were really surprised by how good it is. It also surpasses the TV version, and it's probably the only, and I mean only, Peter Grimwade story I actually like.
That's good. That's good. Now, I know, I don't know if it was this story where you guys mentioned that book called Robot that he wrote.
Yes, and we still can't find a copy of it.
I actually texted you a link to the book. I don't know if you got it.
I don't think I got the link then.
Because I found 5 copies for sale.
Oh, okay.
So I'll send it to you again. But yeah,
all right, thank you.
It's out there. But yeah, I remember this particular story. I remember, of course, it's one of the as far as including the master's sake, basically, in this story. But I do remember watching it, and just the whole story behind Turlo, and that was kind of strange. But there we go. On November 15, 1984, we get the current running episode of the Target Book Club right now, The Caves of Androzani.
Yes.
By Terrence Dix, cover by Andrew Skilleter. 3,000 copies were printed. This book was part of the 85 distribution, despite not having aired in the United States yet. In 2018, the audiobook read by Peter Davison. Not hard to find at all. In fact, there are at least 15 hardcovers in mint condition for sale on eBay, ranging from $50 to $75 in mint condition, so you can have one of your very own. So not just a recent episode, but it's the one currently streaming. So we'll go ahead and tell us what you thought.
Yes, even if you haven't heard the episode yet, it's perfectly fine to hear our scores. It's 153. Dalton gave it a 3. Allison gave it a 2.75, again, fairly high for her. I gave it a 3.5, but not because it's particularly good novelization, because it isn't. It's a very mid-range script-to-page story. It's solid dicks, but it doesn't do anything transformative, and some of the things that he does change things a little too subtly for the book, and it's, as Allison put it, it is not the best way to experience the story for the first time.
Well put. I did like the TV story. That was well done. It was very, although especially I saw it with the cliffhangers, so it was very nail biting.
Well, we found out during our search for it that it is the highest rated classic series story if you look at fan polls.
Yes. Oh yes.
It is the highest, even over Genesis of the Daleks, which is astounding.
Still amazing story. Absolutely. Yeah. Caves is one of my personal favorites. And of course, to conclude 1984, we're going to go out with Less Than a Bang. On December 13th, 1984, the last book of the year was Marco Polo by John Locarati. The cover is by David McAllister, who hasn't done any work for a while. 3,000 copies were printed. The book is dedicated to the late William Hartnell. The 2018 audiobook was read by Sienna Merton, who played Ping Cho in Marco Polo. And she is represented on the cover, here in the corner. she died right after the project was completed. The book, not very hard to find, although all the episodes are extremely hard to find and they have rumored to exist, but so far nobody has come forward with that. So the book can be had for, I found about at least 5 copies for sale currently from $50 and less. So this goes way back for you again, Tony. So what did you guys think of Marco Polo?
It was episode 4 and probably the biggest disagreement on the podcast at that time.
Wow.
Because Jenny gave it a 4.5. I think that was her that was her second, because she had done Edge of Destruction and didn't like that one as much. Dalton gave it a 3.75. I gave it a 2.5, mainly because this is my least favorite John Lucarotti book. There's a lot of reported dialogue. It's rushed at times. Some of the incidents are not very well reported. They loved it, though, and I still kind of look at them askance whenever it's brought up between the three of us. But yeah, not my favorite book.
Yeah, and I can tell you that this book didn't sell very well, even for us, because you can still buy this book from Alien Entertainment, as he has copies from that original inventory still for sale.
Wow.
At least 20 of them. I think he said, I think I got 20 of those sitting back there. They're just not moving. So anyway, just to kind of point that out, why did all these books come to the United States? Well, sales of hardcovers were very weak in the UK and Australia. And so all the overstock was sent to Lyle Stewart in New Jersey to see if they could pawn them off on bookstores. Well, the bookstores didn't like the high price. So they were like, no, we weren't going to do that. So when we made our Target book order with Lyle Stewart, they actually volunteered and said, would you like some hardcovers? And we thought, yeah, why not? We didn't know better. Little did we know that they sent us every hardcover that they had. I believe it was 15 boxes. I made that number. That number jumps out at my head, but it maybe more or less. I just remember getting a call from Gene Smith to say, "Can you get over here?" He lived in back then. He lived in a basement apartment on the west side of Chicago, and getting those down the stairs was no easy task. But anyway, no bookstores were interested, so we had them. And most of the books sold here for $12 to $15. Some of these titles are still available at DoctorWhoStore.com. Sales will continue to weaken, and after 1985, no more hardcovers were sent to the USA, except in 1988, for some strange reason, 50 copies of The Smugglers were sent to Lyle Stewart, in which all 50 copies were bought by Alien Entertainment. So that takes care of the 1984 hardcover books. If you'd like to own a set of these, it's not impossible. This may be the first year I've told you that. So I do own a complete set in mint condition. So a set of these books will cost you a roughly estimate of $710, which is a lot less than, let's say, the 1981 run, which ran over $4,000. So this is a lot cheaper than the previous year. So my advice to all of you, if you're looking for these books, whenever possible, negotiate. In this case, these books are not very expensive, so you should be able to get a set in mint condition without breaking the bank. You can find books at Abe's Used Books, Books A Million, or online at DoctorWhoStore.com. You might get lucky on eBay, but beware of artificially high prices. Watch the Facebook groups. There are respected sellers out there like Dale Santos, Jonathan Ruffle, Luke Ashby, and David Russell, and a few more. And sometimes you can find these at Who North America. They just had a batch of hardcovers come through. As of this taping, DoctorWhoStore.com has the following in stock. They have Enlightenment for $175, Planet of Fire for $75, Caves of Androzani for $65, and the Highlanders for $120. Prices set by the store did not affect my assessment of the average prices and determine value, because I use sold values to determine that. So you can visit DoctorWhoStore.com and get them while you can. My special thanks, of course, to Tony Whitt, host and producer of the Target Book Club podcast, available on SoundCloud as well as other providers. So I know the next episode to come out will be one featuring myself, the Twin Dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
we will have a great discussion on the Twin Dilemma coming out probably not too far in the future of this one.
If not a week from now, almost 2 weeks from now, for sure.
Sounds good. So be sure to tune in your podcast provider to both this podcast and the Doctor Who Target Book Club. We're both part of the same network. Our future episode will continue our classic hardcovers with Tony Whitt later this year as we look at the hardcovers of 1985, which are also included in the U.S. distribution plan. You can follow us on Instagram at Doctor Who Collectors to see full cover art of the books we talk about. Watch this episode on Patreon with a $15 subscription if you want to see the books up close. If you have any photos of proof of life of books that we haven't talked about or know not to exist, please email those to drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com with hardcover photos in the subject line. So once again, thanks for being here, Tony.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
And stay tuned for the most outrageous offer.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Allison Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast on the Direction Point Podcast Network. Keep collecting.
We are going on a journey, a very long journey, through the world of the Target novelizations in publication order. Every week we are looking at a new book, talking about Terrence Dicks, Malcolm Hulke, and all our Doctor Who novelization friends. Whatever you do, keep turning the pages. This is Jason Miller of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast, a member of the Direction Point Podcast Network, and you are listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Keep collecting.
All my travellings throughout the universe, I have battled against evil, against power-mad conspirators. I should have stayed here. The oldest civilization. Decadent, degenerate, and rotten to the core. Power-mad conspirators, Daleks, Sontarans, Cybermen. They're still in the nursery compared to us. 10 million years of absolute power. That's what it takes to be really corrupt.
And now it's time for the most outrageous offer. The most outrageous offer is a Doctor Who item or Doctor Who related item that appears to be priced way too high for its own good. And these come in quite a bit. I get them through, Facebook, through Instagram, through email, and some of them, of course, I have to kind of go, well, maybe, because that's the only one I've seen out there. If there's one of a kind out there, I'm going to let it go because unless a second one pops up, it's not that outrageous. However, the person sometimes, who's listing the book will go, whoa, maybe I'm a little too crazy here and I need to bring it down. But today we have one here that I'm going to declare outrageous only because you can get it for quite a bit less. And even quite a few less prices are also a little outrageous. This is a new adventure book. Of course, it's called Christmas on a Rational Planet by Lawrence Miles. It was published in 1996, of course, Virgin Books. And I've got a copy here that is used. Doesn't have a lot of information on it. It just says very good condition. The seller here is DSM Books out of Liverpool, United Kingdom. And this is from Abe's Books. So their asking price here, of course, shipping to the United States, $31.98, which I get $1,564.95. Now, in most cases, the odd number would be a thing, but I believe the original price of this here in British pounds, so let's see, it would be £1,223.37. So who knows how that seem to go here. But anyway, this paperback is certainly not worth $1,500 in any stretch. The other thing I noted too, whenever I'm in, get a link to a books, they usually said view all 6 copies of this book. And so the lowest priced copy here, which is in good condition as well, is $125. That's probably a little closer to what is reasonable, but then after that it goes up to $206 and then $263 and $295, and there's even one for $500. Crazy. I did a little search on eBay and I found a copy here, and there's a couple of these for $49.95 on up. So all the way up to about $100, which is pretty much the going price for this book. So I certainly am going to declare the $1,500 price tag to be outrageous. And of course, we will have screenshots and links on our webpage as long as they are active. Sometimes after this episode, they disappear. People contact them or they barrage them with messages saying, hey, this crazy price, you made the podcast, and I do that. I'm not trying to disparage the sellers. I want to get that right out of the way here. I'm just trying to educate folks that the reason that they put these prices out there is they expect to get it. And I think you have the right to say, no, I'm not going to pay that. I've been lucky. I always look for the lower price. I always look for a better offer. And a lot of times, I have friends, of course, in the industry. After doing this for 40 some odd years, I have dear friends that are in the industry that will cut me a good deal if they know it's for me. Because I'm not trying to turn it around for a quick buck. I'm trying to keep a little museum going here. So it's important that we understand that. Of course, there you go. That's our most outrageous offer. If you find a Doctor Who item, I couldn't talk, a Doctor Who item that is way above the mark, although nothing has ever reached our $1 million calendar yet, but that's okay. There's still time. And you can send that to me here at drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com. Include full links and photos if you can, and then we'll investigate the offer. And if it turns out to be outrageous and you'd like to be thanked on the program, just let us know. In this case, it was an anonymous request, so we will, of course, honor that as well. There we go. And that wraps up this episode of the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. I want to thank my guest, Mr. Tony Whitt, for being on the program today. And, of course, check out the Doctor Who Target Book Club. I am on the episode for The Twin Dilemma. And we'll be sponsoring the episode on Time Lash coming up soon. So what's coming up next? Well, our next episode, we've got to sit down with Stephen Warren Hill. He is the program director of Chicago TARDIS, but more importantly, the principal author of Red, Right, and Who, The Story of Doctor Who in America, a book I mention on every episode of the podcast. So we have a really great discussion to put to you for there. So until then, keep collecting.
A Doctor Who Podcast Network.